Hello, everybody. Welcome to Dungeon of Deadly Delights. I'm, of course, one of your hosts, Rob DiLauro, and with me, as always, is Miss Holly Interlandi. Holly, how is it going?
Cheers.
So, this is our 40th episode, guys, which is absolutely crazy. Every single time that we hit a milestone episode, it's kind of it's kind of out of body. You know what I mean? Because there's so much that goes into these shows, and the fact that we're like able to keep the longevity going, it just blows my mind every single time.
Without a significant break either. None of us have gotten, like horribly diseased or, injured or otherwise unable to do the show. So
Yeah.
cross your fingers, knock on wood.
Yeah, and the other cool thing is not necessarily cool, but like we got to, especially through the time that me and you have worked together, we've really talked about some really poignant stuff while still having fun with it and educating people. And we were doing shows like, obviously the pandemic isn't over, but we were doing shows like, when people thought this was like Captain Trips, you know what I mean? Like everybody was like kind of terrified. So it's almost like we're reporting like through, you know what I mean? Like through the actual times that are going on, which is kind of interesting.
Well, that's what a show does if it's following real time. Yeah.
No, what I mean is like, like I think right before the pandemic actually happened, or it was like right around the time, I think it was right around the time where it was kind of circulating. We were talking about, like
we did the zombie episode, didn't we?
Yeah. And unfortunately, the unfortunate situation with a lot of people of color and George Floyd, talking about black horror and like just really just doing some really interesting stuff. You know what I mean? While still having a good time doing it. At least I hope you all out there are having a good time when we're talking about this stuff. It just shows you how credible and important the genre is, and how much stuff there is to talk about in the genre. It's very credible, even though some people might not think that. It absolutely is. So with that, our 40th episode, we decided that we wanted to talk about animal attack films, which I'm honestly not the biggest fan of. There's a few that I really love, but like when an animal attack movie comes out, like for me, it's not just like, oh, I gotta run the fuck, you know what I mean? Like I'm not so. So this will be interesting because
I love animal attack movies. First of all, like not only for the actual movie, but I love like all behind the scenes like shenanigans about like having to train animals or like dress animals up like this or whatever. Yeah, animal disasters are one of my favorites. As long provided there's a high body count.
Mm-hmm.
When it's an animal disaster movie, I really need a high body count. Otherwise, it's like, what's the point? So that's why I'm not like really into movies that have like one or two people who are trying to get away from the same animal the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
I just get kind of bored. I'm like, somebody needs to die. There needs to be some carnage. Let's get some gore up in this shit,
Yeah. I think for me, I think it's kind of the opposite. And I think, obviously there's, like thousands of reasons, like, I could write a fucking Valentine's Day card right now of why we make a great team. But for me, it's not about the carnage. For me, I think an animal attack film works when there is some sort of human dynamic involved. You know what I mean? Like some sort of family situation or something along those lines, some underlying thing that isn't necessarily just about the particular animal itself. Does that make sense? There just needs to be some human drama attached to make it work for me.
Yeah, fair enough. I think, characterization, I think, yeah. I mean, when you look at a movie like
human characters need to be just as important to me as the animal itself. You know what I mean? You okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
Did that stun you?
No, I mean, it depends on the movie. Obviously when you look at something like Jaws, I mean, the characters are just as important as the shark.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Which that's absolutely valid. I think part of what I love about animal disaster movies, though, is that they can be completely ridiculous
Hmm.
and just exploit that ridiculousness and not have to worry about being a serious character movie. At least for me, that's the case with a couple of the movies that I've picked
Yeah.
because I just love that shit.
Yeah, I got a lot of human drama in my list, but
Well, I've got the carnage and you got the human drama. So.
that's right. That's right. Ebony and Ivory. Have you ever been attacked by an animal before?
Nope.
No, never been bit by a dog or anything like that.
Nope. My dad was attacked by a German Shepherd once,
Hmm.
and he's terrified of German Shepherds still.
Oh,
But no, I've never have. I have no issues with creatures, whether of the deep or of the forest.
yeah. I've only had one situation. It was like when I was very young. I was probably about 3 years old or something, maybe 3 or 4. And when my mother was married to my sister's father, we were his family lived on a farm, and I just walked up to their dog. I guess I don't really remember too much about it. I went up to the dog and tried to pet it, and the dog fucking grabbed my face, like right here. I actually have a scar right here because the dog actually pulled on my lip and like tried to tear it off, I guess.
Ouch.
Yeah. So I had a few stitches going on in my lip here because of a dog attack. But I love dogs. So yeah, the other thing that's really interesting is when situations actually happen. Like I think during the pandemic, I believe it was like in a certain part of India or something. Like I guess like this one area was just basically overrun by monkeys, and one of them tried to grab a child. Did you see that?
No.
Like literally picked it right off a bench or something, and like started like running with this child. Um,
That's kind of
yeah,
hilarious, actually. I
yeah, yeah,
probably wouldn't. I'm not the person to watch that because I'd just be laughing my ass off.
yeah. And the other thing I want people to know is, me personally, I didn't want to focus on sharks because honestly, I think sharks are kind of like their own subgenre. Wouldn't you say so?
Well, and we already did the underwater horror episode,
Hmm.
which I feel like which had some sharks in it, and we talked about Jaws in the giant monsters episode. So
Yeah.
no, I agree. I didn't pick any shark movies. I tried to stick mostly to mammals,
Hmm.
with a few exceptions.
Right.
So.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, we could also. That's the thing. You can lump all these things into different categories. I mean, like we could have an entire insect episode.
Oh
But
yeah, well that's another thing is I didn't put any insects in here too because I feel like those are also inherently different because they tend to focus more on the swarm concept
yeah.
than the single animal thing.
Right.
So.
Right. Okay. So episode 40, animal attack movies.
Woohoo!
Here we go. Holly, what is first on your list?
Well, I'm going to start with what is actually technically a classic, even though I hadn't seen it until very recently, and I was just boggled by how entertaining this movie is. Like it's not high quality cinema by any means, but it's just the pacing is perfect. And when I finished it, the movie is 1980s Alligator, the original Alligator.
Mm-hmm.
When I finished it, I truly felt that I had just watched the
Robert
Jaws.
Forster, rest in peace, sir. What a great fucking actor Robert Forster was. I miss him already.
Well, when I finished it, I felt like I had just watched the Jaws of crocodile alligator movies. Mm-hmm. Like that's what it felt like to me for a bunch of different reasons. Not the least of which that it has sort of a similar pacing with the reveal of the alligator. You don't it starts with the rumors and you don't actually see the whole alligator till much later, and they used the director Louis Teague, who actually also directed another great animal attack movie, Cujo. Well, the premise of Alligator is, I mean, just about as ridiculous as premises get when it comes to animal attack films. An exotic pet alligator that that a young girl brings home from an alligator wrestling event is dropped down the toilet by her angry father when he discovers that there is a small baby alligator in the house. He flushes it down the toilet, and it proceeds to feed on the corpses of animals that have been tested with growth hormones.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much primarily dogs, and that's one thing that I should say about Alligator, and actually a couple other films on my list as well, is that it has some very outdated ideas when it comes to animal testing that could be upsetting to some people, especially the scene where Robert Force's character, goes to the testing clinic and sees all these puppies in the cages who have had their larynxes ripped out. It's upsetting for so if that upsets you, I wouldn't recommend watching this movie. But beyond that, this alligator has been feeding on the dog corpses that are being tested with growth hormones and steroids, and so he grows to an abnormally large size, as one does in a film like this, and starts attacking sewer workers. I think one of whom is actually, I think, depositing dog carcasses from the horrible testing facility. Like the whole thing is portrayed as very shady and not okay at all. So it's not like they're like, yay, animal testing. It's super creepy. But yeah, our main character, is a detective policeman. It's pretty straightforward. He consults a reptile expert, kind of like Jaws, actually. You've got the main policeman, there's an expert, and then about halfway through the film, they bring in, the alligator hunter, who is supposed to be the one to kill the alligator. So in that case, it is very much like Jaws.
Did this come out before Jaws? Or, I can't remember.
This was 1980, so 5 years after.
Okay, yeah.
But I think it's honestly, I think it's like just the formula that works so well, and why I thought of Jaws when I was watching it is because it does everything that Jaws did right, including one of the best giant monster crashes a rich wedding party scenes I've ever seen in my life. Like, it is truly satisfying.
Is that in its own category? Animals crashing rich wedding parties?
Oh, are you kidding? Or maybe just rich wedding parties being crashed by whatever it is. Like these rich hoity-toity assholes are oblivious and be like, I don't know, we've got a party, and then something horrible happens. I just love that shit. It's so good. But like Jaws, they used a giant animatronic alligator that often malfunctioned. But then there are some other obvious shots where they used a real alligator, although mostly filmed from above, and he's just like, there's film an alligator walking. But I mean, this alligator, he busts out of the sewers onto a sidewalk. Like he just takes no shit. I love this movie.
I'm going to talk about a bear film that I saw, maybe like 10 years ago, and I really liked it a lot. And it stars Sir Anthony Hopkins and Alec Baldwin. Speaking of Trump, folks.
Oh, yes.
It's called The Edge.
Yeah, yes, which I never saw, but
it's so good, so good. So basically, so it is technically an animal attack movie, but again, like I was talking about, when it comes to my need for, some sort of human interaction or some sort of human drama that makes it more appealing to me. You've got a very wealthy man played by Sir Anthony Hopkins, and he's married to a model played by Elle Macpherson. Alec Baldwin happens to be the photographer for Elle, and they are all going on a plane trip together, and right away there is no trust within these two men, like none at all. Like, is he going to kill me, or is he going to kill me because he knows about like this affair that I'm having with his wife? There's a lot of really there's some really tense stuff emotionally when it comes to these characters because they already don't trust each other. So it's like, okay, well, we're already off and running here. So there is an accident. The plane crashes, and the assistant of Alec Baldwin actually dies. And so basically, so these two men that don't trust each other whatsoever are stuck in the wilderness alone, and in the meanwhile, there's this massive grizzly that's that's after them, and there's a couple really serious altercations where like they almost lose their lives because this thing is just so huge. You know what I mean? Like every time they try to, they try to run from this thing, it's just so bulky and massive, and it just like, is right behind them, like at every single turn. So, they actually try to, they try to, use spears at a certain point. Like they're actually like, putting, cutting spears, putting them together and stuff. And the hide is so thick on this bear that literally like, like the spear doesn't even penetrate it because this thing is so huge. Like I think I love when people say that like bears are cute and stuff, and they forget that these things are just killing machines if they need to be.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to run into a bear. So basically what happens is in the actual like human interaction with these two characters, it turns out that Alec Baldwin wanted to kill Anthony Hopkins for his wife, like for her. And then basically like they have another altercation with this massive bear, and they end up being able to finally incapacitate it. And so Anthony Hopkins like knows that this guy wants to kill him. And then like he gets into a scrape. It's so weird because every single time that they're like, in this, like in this wilderness situation, like the one guy will go like, yeah, I was trying to kill you. And then all of a sudden, like he'll fall into like a river or something and he'll go, help me. And then they'll help each other.
It's the classic scenario where two people hate each other until certain death, or like a death-defying danger happens, and then all of a sudden,
that's your best friend.
Yep. All of a sudden, it's your best friend. Yep.
Yeah, that's your lifeline. When you watch this movie and you see this bear, I don't know what the whole production situation was, but this thing just fucking.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, like, if they used a real bear or if
they must have for certain scenes. They must have, because I mean, it literally looked like this huge bear head is like 10 feet in front of Anthony Hopkins' face. You know what I mean? Like it's crazy. But yeah, it's a good bear movie. I know there's another one that came out in 2014 called Backcountry. I know that you're going to talk about a bear film. It's not really a big subgenre, bears. I know this is a horror show, but I could have easily talked about the bald bear from The Great Outdoors. Big bear chase! Big bear chase!
But I think the exception comes in when it's a grizzly bear, because they are so fucking massive, and they
they're super predatory. And if you're on their turf, it does, what I mean? It doesn't matter what you're doing. You're sightseeing, taking pictures, or whatever the fuck. Like they're going to protect. They're going to protect their own. They're going to protect their territory, and you're just like if you don't have a fucking picnic basket, then you're straight up food too. So
yeah. Well, and they not only do they live, are they like the wildest and the largest of the bears, but they I think they intimidate people in a lot. Like when I was a kid, I remember they would like a Kodiak. It's also called a Kodiak bear, grizzly bear, and they would have these pictures of them like reared up on their hind legs, and then they're like 12 feet tall, these bears, and that's pretty damn scary when you're a kid, and it is at any point. But I mean, but the film that I'm going to bring up is Grizzly.
What's really interesting though, before you start with the next film, living out here in Georgia, I didn't even know this, obviously, because I don't really have a lot of encounters with bears, but there are bears here in Georgia, and apparently in certain areas you can actually pinpoint right away when a bear is near, because it apparently fucking stinks. Like bears smell horrible. You know what I mean? Because they root in garbage all day, or whatever they're doing.
Yeah, I think it depends on the bear, but yeah, probably.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the one thing. So I remember somebody told me that they smell like the first thing like you could smell a bear like immediately.
Well, I mean, there's a bear on the California flag, but there haven't been bears here in 50 years. They all went to Canada. Can you blame them? But
Um,
anyway,
so you were going to talk about a bear movie. That's also
yeah,
a classic. Cult.
this one is called Grizzly
Mhm.
from 1976. Um, it was, funnily enough, when it came out, people used to call it Jaws on Land because it had a very similar like um, plot movement
Yeah.
to Jaws, but apparently the film was actually written around the same time as Jaws, and it just didn't come into production until later. It was an independent production, actually. There was no major studio behind this,
Hmm.
um, and it just, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. There's a park ranger. It's a national park. They don't really mention where it is. You assume it's sort of somewhere like up in Dakota somewhere, or maybe Montana or Lower Canada or something. Because they do have bears, but the bear that ends up coming down to attack people is a prehistorically large grizzly bear.
Hmm.
Um, and what's so entertaining about this film is, I mean, they did use a real bear for a few of the scenes, like from far off, where he like stands up and goes roar, and you can sort of see the trainer off screen being like, "Good boy," he's like, "Swipe at the air," roar. But the greatest thing is when the bear attacks, and they use like puppet bear paws, and they just sort of swipe, and then they follow a flailing bloody limb to like wherever it lands on the ground. It's like a predictable formula. Like the bear comes down, he attacks a couple of girls who are camping, and he goes swipe, and one of their legs goes flying, and then one of my well, I guess it's not a good scene if you're a horse fan, but one of my personal favorite scenes is when the bear guru is riding a horse, through the park trying to find this bear, and the bear goes swipe, and the horse's whole head just goes flying, and it lands on the ground, and there's just it's so hilarious. I can't
So
even.
it's like the Jason Voorhees of bears, basically.
The swipe.
It's just killing to kill. Like there's really no serious motivation. It's just like a monster.
Yeah, I mean, you're supposed to think that it's eating people, and I mean, I think it probably does, but again, like Jaws, it has a bunch of drunken hunters coming in who are trying to kill the bear, and there's actually really a pretty cool scene where one of the younger park rangers is standing on top of like a tower, like an
Yeah.
arrow tower, trying to find the bear, and then he realizes the bear is like right up against the tower, and the bear starts shaking the tower and like bringing him down, and you're just like, yes, like there's no rhyme or reason to what this bear does.
There's a couple movies in my catalog, at least, where you're in a situation where you're trapped inside with an animal. Um, and I think I want to talk about a movie called Burning Bright, which I saw
Oh,
probably about 6 years ago. And it's actually really damn good, I think. Um, there's a couple
I know of it. I
things.
didn't see it.
There's a couple problematic things within that I'll talk about. But I mean, I guess to a certain degree, it actually means well. I just see things differently when it comes to, children. When situations happen with children with special needs and stuff, I just have a whole different perspective on it now. That's probably my bugaboo or my hang up. In the beginning of the movie, you see Garrett Dillahunt, who, of course, was Krug in the remake for Last House on the Left, one of the greatest remakes of all time, in my opinion. And he's also in Fear the Walking Dead, respectively. He is, basically like, pulling this Tiger King and, like spends this money on this fucking tiger. And his daughter is preparing to go to college. She had actually received a scholarship, but she has an autistic younger brother. And she takes him to this facility where he's, supposed to, obviously, like get tended to and, get his care and everything. and the money doesn't go through. So it turns out that the money that was supposed to be like, for the son's care and everything else in between when it comes to the family was actually like pulled away from the father. Yeah. So she tries to, she tries to go to school for the first semester, and she's told by one of the professors that, if you don't come to school now, then you're going to, pretty much lose your scholarship. So she's obviously like got a really deep already has a deep dish of resentment when it comes to her brother who's autistic. Because she feels like, her life is ruined because, she had to tend to her brother because her mother had, at this point in the movie, like she had actually committed suicide. She had taken a bunch of pills and, killed herself. So in the meanwhile, Garrett Dillahunt is actually like telling all these workers that there's going to be a hurricane coming, and he wants them to board up his entire house. And so the daughter actually goes to confront him at the house, and so basically like her and her autistic brother are, in this home, and then all of a sudden, like I think it's the next day or something, like somebody actually opens the fucking door of the house and a tiger just walks into the house. So, before this whole altercation happens, this is the thing I had a problem with, but I guess I understand to a certain degree because, she does have, obviously like, there's things to be angry about, obviously. And, like they show that in a sequence where she's, like tending to her brother and she's putting him to bed, and she actually has a dream later on where she actually tries to suffocate her brother so she doesn't have to deal with him anymore.
We were talking about that in the anthology episode.
Yeah.
About that sort of personal guilt issue.
Yeah. So the next day, like somebody just lets a tiger loose in the house. Like you don't even know how it got there, really. And they're literally like, she's literally just like, living her life. Like she's like going to the bathroom, brush her teeth, has no fucking clue that this thing is in this house. And then of course, she actually like turns a corner and she sees a tiger, and she just, obviously is like, what the fuck? You know what I mean? And immediately goes to help her brother. And there's a couple really tense scenes where, like she gets really close to this thing, and then it ends up actually like swiping her. So the whole time she's got this like, just this gouging wound, you know what I mean? Like she's trying to, tend to this wound. And it's basically like, it's a home invasion movie with a tiger. That's pretty much what it is. And, like they're just trying to like, outfox this thing as much as they can. And, she, I guess she accidentally dropped her cell phone. There's like a laundry chute. And I guess like, when she was like dumping her hamper or something, like the cell phone happened to be in there. So she actually has to go down the basement and like, hunt around for this fucking phone. And, there's all these different, situations that actually occur. So, aside from the tiger aspect, turns out that these kids, like their father had it planned all along that he was going to actually creating a life insurance policy for the both of them, and he was going to collect the money, for their deaths. And then it also turns out that he actually, I guess he, thought his wife was going to leave him or something. So he actually killed her. She didn't commit suicide at all. So all these things are coming to light for this poor girl. You know what I mean? Because she actually finds the life insurance policies in a study. So that was the whole point for the tiger. It wasn't like, there's a hurricane and an animal just happened to get in. I mean, this dude literally boarded up the house, and his whole plot was to let this tiger loose and, kill his own kids. But the other thing that's really beautiful about it is obviously like, I think the brother and sister dynamic, changes and stuff. I think there's a moment at the, kind of at the tail end of the movie where, they kind of, they get into an ice chest together, and, the brother's having, sensory overload issues, obviously, because he's terrified. Yeah. And she's trying to, sing a lullaby to him to calm him down. And so there's really beautiful scenes between the, brother and sister and stuff. And she basically just says to him, like, I will, I will never, let anybody hurt you. But a really solid movie. I thought a really solid movie, and it just showed me that there should probably be some more tiger horror out there. I think there's room for it. I think there's definitely room for it. What's next on your list?
Well, there. See, this one in particular. When it comes to rats,
Mm-hmm.
people hate rats.
Yeah.
And they get a bad rap, but obviously rats carried the plague in the Middle Ages, and they carry rabies and whatever. So people just hate rats. There are rat movies galore. I think there's one that's just called Rats. There's Willard, of course, which with the amazing Crispin Glover, who controls rats.
Of a movie called Ben.
Sorry.
Which is a remake of a movie called Ben. Ben, the two of us will live no more. That's where that Michael Jackson song came from, was that song Ben. Because I guess Michael Jackson, when he was a kid, one of his best friends, because his fucking family's so awful and horrible, was a rat. So he actually wrote Ben for the movie Ben, which is Willard is the remake for Ben. It's just kind of the same premise. I think it was a little more. I don't know. There was some. Willard seemed a little supernatural to me somehow. I don't know.
Oh yeah, no, totally. He had a supernatural control over the rats.
Mm-hmm.
But at least for me, when you have a normal sized rat, I guess maybe if you adopt the insect principle and put them in giant swarms, they can become threatening. But when it comes to rat movies, I prefer the Canadian masterpiece that is Deadly Eyes,
mm-hmm.
from 1982, because these are mutant steroidal dog-sized rats.
Oh
yeah. And part of what
fangs too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Part of what I love about Deadly Eyes is that there's no build-up to the giant rats. Like you're supposed to think it's like this corn arrives that's got steroids pumped into it, and the health official, who's one of the main characters, is like, we've got to burn all this corn, it's contaminated, blah blah blah, and you're like, oh, okay, so the rats are going to eat the corn and become gigantic. There's a cat, on the dock with the corn, who like weaves its way into a crate and encounters a giant rat all of a sudden. So it's like the rats eat the corn and they're gigantic, like immediately. Boom. No waiting period. Just immediate giant rats.
So corn is the catalyst for their gigantic.
Steroid infused corn, yes. And it's another movie where the sewers obviously are the culprit. Although in this one the mayor is attempting to build a new subway system in the underground, which has another fantastic carnage wrecking a fancy party scene near the end. But
I just see one list right now, just trying to find like movies that have like rich people being fucking eaten by.
Oh no, it's a thing. Seriously, I have to think about it, but I'm sure I could come up with a big list. And this movie's it's bizarre. There's like the main character is a professor of like ecology or environmental science or something, and there's this random side plot of one of his students wanting to sleep with him, mm-hmm. which is very focused on, but literally goes nowhere. Like there's no consequence, like nothing happens. So it's kind of like, okay, what was the point again? Like they just threw that in there to make it scandalous, because I guess giant rats aren't scandalous enough. But at any rate,
Radioactive Corn.
This movie was directed by Robert Klaus,
mm-hmm.
who did a hell of a lot of Bruce Lee movies.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of Bruce Lee Easter eggs in this film.
Oh, really?
Which, for a movie about giant rats, is pretty hilarious.
Is there kung fu in it?
Well, nobody kung fu's the rats, but I'm talking about things like at a movie theater there's like a Bruce Lee marathon playing and stuff like that.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
the great thing about the rats, though, and part of what attracted me to the film is that, of course, this was 1982, there's no CGI, so the close-ups of the rats in the sewer, they were using animatronic rats and puppets and stuff, with how they did close-ups of animatronic animals. But when it came to the big masses of rats running at people through the sewers, they dressed up a bunch of wiener dogs in rat outfits and put smells and stuff along the sides of the sewers so they'd run in a particular direction.
Oh my God, that's so funny.
And I couldn't resist. I was like, that's the greatest thing I've ever heard. There's an old professor scientist who goes down to the laundry room. And actually there's another, Scatman Crothers from The Shining is one of the early victims of the rat infestation, unfortunately. But it's a pretty good scene, though,
One of those black man dies first situations, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I mean, it was the 80s. I feel like it was sort of a thing. The professor, of course, ends up falling in love with the public health specialist, because that's how these things work in the 80s. And she and his son are somehow end up on the subway, the test subway ride that is going through the new subway tunnel near the end, and the rats chew the cables. The subway breaks down, everyone's forced to get off the subway and walk on the tracks, and the rats attack. So it's not particularly, nothing really surprising happens. I mean, it's a bunch of rats and a bunch of blood, or rather wiener dogs dressed as rats.
So speaking of dogs, let's talk about a couple dog films.
Yep.
First off, I want to talk about one that, well, unfortunately, the director committed suicide, and it's really a shame. It's really a shame. Not only the fact that somebody feels the need to have to take their own life, but this guy really had something unique when it came to the to this idea. And even though people trashed it for being just a stupid ass movie, I think it was really, there was some intelligence involved in Man's Best Friend.
Oh, yes.
So basically, it's a pretty simple premise. I mean, it's there's this lab that's I guess secretly altering animals, and this one happens to be this dog that happens to be one of the biggest breeds of dogs I've ever seen in my life, called a Tibetan Mastiff. This thing is huge. It's huge, and it's fuzzy, and it's just huge. It's a monster. It looks like a bear. That's what this dog looks like. It looks like a bear. One of the biggest dogs I've ever seen, aside from maybe like an Irish wolfhound or something like that. This thing is huge. So basically, Lance Henriksen is the guy actually working on these animals and stuff. And I guess the whole point with Max, this dog Max, is that he also has characteristics of other animals. So he can climb like like cheetah, and he has all these different things that he can do. So Ali Sheedy, who plays this television personality, reporter, I guess, is invited to to this facility to check out things and whatnot. And it basically ends up in a situation where she ends up being friends with this dog Max, and ends up taking this thing home, not before her purse gets snatched, and Max goes after the guy who stole her purse, and brutally kills the guy.
Mutilates him, yes.
Mutilates him. He's so protective of Ali Sheedy at this point. It is completely obedient to her. So she takes her, takes Max back to her house, and he is just the sweetest dog, and her fucking boyfriend asshole hates the dog immediately. We can't keep the dog, this and that. So interestingly enough, interestingly enough, Ali Sheedy did do Short Circuit, so she has this tendency to be, to hide shit, like robots and robot dogs and
robots and robot dogs.
So the boyfriend absolutely hates the dog. treats it like shit. And, you know, like the whole time this thing is acting really sweet and stuff, it's actually like terrorizing the neighborhood in the meantime when she's not paying attention. So it like it goes after like a paper boy, and like you said, it eats a cat, like swallows it whole after climbing up a tree. Like
yeah, the cat, that's the great thing about that scene is the cat's like, I'm gonna climb a tree and then I'm gonna be safe.
Yeah.
And this bat just climbs the tree right after it.
Mm-hmm.
You can see how that'd be scary in a little kid's mind, even if it's not scary now when you watch the film. But.
Mm-hmm. So Lance Henriksen is like basically he wants his dog back. You know, he was the one that manufactured it and like put all these different traits in it and stuff. And he knows it's a deadly weapon. It's deadly. It's a deadly weapon. It's it's like a Terminator in a dog is what it is.
Yeah.
So he's trying to get it back, and so he ends up disappearing from the house, and then he ends up going back and finds out that Ali Sheedy and her boyfriend actually bought a new dog. So he automatically gets jealous, and not even just jealous at the boyfriend, but also gets pissed off at Ali Sheedy. And like ends up like trying to attack her, and then the boyfriend actually ends up getting fucking squirted in the face with he pisses in the boyfriend's face with his acidic urine, which is really fucking fantastic. So, basically there's an altercation because Lance Henriksen kidnapped Ali Sheedy. The dog has a heart for Ali Sheedy, ends up killing Lance Henriksen. In the process, he ends up getting shot and dying. But there could have been a sequel, because during this time he was having his way with a collie in the neighborhood.
That's always the twist, isn't it, with these animal movies? Mm-hmm. Or even monster movies. It's always they've procreated.
Mm-hmm.
There are more. Actually, I think that's the twist with Alligator too.
Which I don't fucking understand. I mean, like, how would his robotic traits get into the collie? Like, you know what I mean? Like, how would obviously that would be the twist that would freak people out. Like, oh no, Max actually had sex with one of the collies in the neighborhood during the movie. So that means the puppies would be robotic? What?
Maybe he had robotic sperm. She would give birth to like robotic puppies.
It's like, yeah, like his sperm is just like some sort of like some sort of alloy, like from T2 or something. It turns itself robotic.
This is why I love animal attack movies, because with the rare few exceptions, they're all fucking ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Man's Best Friend, I think, is I think it has a loyal following when it comes to cult fans and stuff. I think I think actually it was re-examined for the most part when it came to certain people. I think they actually found it more pleasing than initially when it first came out and whatnot. And
obviously it holds a special place in my heart, or at least my 11-year-old heart. I was terrified by it.
I would take a huge swing by guessing this, but I would think, since I actually knew Lance for a short time, he would call this an alimony movie. Which is basically when Lance does a movie simply because he has to pay his mortgage or he needs to pay his ex-wife, or that's an alimony movie. So I don't think Lance, I don't think you're going to see him at too many speaker, functions.
Best friend convention.
Not Man's Best Friend, no.
Dude, if there were a Man's Best Friend convention, I would be there in like a heartbeat.
I would guess Lance Henriksen hates this movie. Just my guess. Never hear him talk about it ever. What's next on your list?
Well, we're moving further and further along in my timeline here. We're going to come out of the 80s finally and get to the cheesy early 90s with a film that is absolutely batshit. Like just batshit. Like it's
more batshit than wiener dogs and rat costumes. All right, let's do this.
And what makes it so batshit is not only what eventually ends up happening, but the setup and the premise.
It's called batshit.
It's just ridiculous. And the film was called Shockma.
Oh, Shockma.
The film was called Shockma.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes place at this another animal testing facility. Again, trigger warning for those of you who are not okay with outdated animal testing ideas. But their professor and his assistants are experimenting on monkeys and apes, and this baboon in particular, who they give a drug to that's supposed to, I think it's supposed to like reduce its aggression, but I think it ends up having the opposite effect, and it ends up lashing out and attacking one of the assistants, and so they have to put to sleep with what they think is a lethal dose of euthanasia. And they, roll it into the dead monkey room. I don't know what you want to call it. But then, of course, the professor and several of his assistants, and plus, a couple of girlfriends and their colleagues, love to play this fantasy role-playing Dungeons and Dragons type game in the building after hours. And the really like ridiculous thing here is that this professor like willingly, like he locks them in the building. He turns off all the fire alarms. He turns off all the phones. Basically, it's like, this, we're going to make everything as authentic as possible for this fantasy D&D game where I guess the object is to like move up in floor levels and eventually find the princess after like getting a bunch of clues from rooms and stuff. So it's because they play the game for the first like 20 minutes of the movie, and it's like, oh god, like it's really, I'm like
really involved. It's like you're watching somebody play Dungeons and Dragons.
Watching people play Dungeons and Dragons. But the amazing thing is the length that these people went to like make this, the most authentic game ever. And it's like this professor is like, really, dude? Like, you're gonna lock everybody in a building and unplug everything? It's like, you're just asking for shit. You're just asking for shit.
Yeah.
So of course, one of the colleagues ends up on the 5th floor, which happens to be where the primates were stored and where they ended up putting the supposedly dead baboon, who is not dead. The baboon is very, very not dead. The experimental drugs have basically fried his brain, and he's a psychopath. Absolutely a terror. Like he's like this guy. He enters the room.
Jason Voorhees and a monkey. I'm gonna keep using the Jason Voorhees reference.
Yeah. Well, this guy. The first guy gets killed. He enters the room and he looks around, and this baboon just runs full tilt at him and runs up his body and like eviscerates his neck. Like just bam. And I'm like, dude, like. Baboons have a reputation for being vicious, but this is some next level shit. The star of the show is definitely the baboon, who was apparently played by a real baboon named Typhoon. It's a pretty intimidating creature. Like they managed to make it to where if you ran into this thing in an empty building, you'd be like, oh shit.
Well, yeah. You're ripping people's throats out. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it keeps going. Like the professor, of course, he's been talking to these students on walkie-talkies, the whole time, because that's how they communicate in this authentic game. And he loses contact with all of them. So he's like, I don't understand what's going on. And he takes the elevator upstairs.
So they were LARPing, is what they were.
Yeah, they're LARPing. They're LARPing in an abandoned building with all the locks up, the fire alarms turned off. Like I'm saying, like you guys are just asking for shit.
I'm going to talk about a movie that's actually, it's supposed to be a very lighthearted comedy back when it was produced. And it was discovered by Tim League in the Alamo Draft House, and they decided in their wise and infinite wisdom that this thing is a fucking midnight screener, and we need to put this out all the time. People need to see this movie because it's absolutely. Holly mentioned the word batshit. I think this goes above and beyond any the word is indescribable for this film. So as I said, it's supposed to be a comedy, a lighthearted comedy that her Tippi Hedren and her husband and her unfortunate children were trying to produce about this man who runs a wildlife reserve, and he is supposed to pick up his wife and his kids from the airport and take them back to this reserve, and there's a whole thing with deeds and stuff, and hilarity ensues. And it's called
Why could you possibly be talking about Roar?
I am very much, I'm talking about Roar. So Roar is probably the most, and I say this with like being completely honest, is probably the most dangerous production there's ever been in the history of film.
Yeah, I mean, just to give you some perspective, like when they were filming Grizzly and they had a bear on set, everyone in the entire production was forbidden to get within like 15 feet of this bear. Mm-hmm. The only people who were allowed to approach it were its trainers. Mm-hmm. Everyone else is like, get away from the bear, because that's standard filming protocols, Yeah. Not Roar.
So Tippi Hedren of Birds fame, she
get attacked by things.
She loved being around wild animals, and her family literally had lions and all kinds of shit living in their home in Sherman Oaks, California. So before Melanie Griffith became the actress that she became, when she was a child, she was probably terrified a good 75 to 80% of her existence, because she was friends with these wild jungle creatures that were roaming around their house. But there was actually, according to Melanie Griffith, been tons of incidences where, as a little girl, she almost got her face swiped off, simply because the thing was trying to be loving and didn't realize, its own strength, and swiped its paw, across her face and took some off. You know what I mean?
That's another thing with these huge wild animals, is that they don't realize they're huge a lot of the time. Or no. if they do, they're like, oh, it's a little human, let's play with it. Well, psh.
No. So I don't think the plot really matters when it comes to this movie, because it's not a horror film, but the fact that...
Honestly, I don't even remember the plot, or if it had much of one.
Well, it's just a wacky little adventure about a wildlife reserve owner's family and a deed and all this other stuff, and then it just turned into a complete and utter hellscape, because during production, I think before production 70 people got injured, and then during production I think about 48 people got injured. So people were swiped in the legs and arms by cougars. Tippi Hedren almost lost an arm. Her husband contracted gangrene because he was bitten so many fucking times that he almost lost appendages.
I mean, if you haven't seen the film, just to give you an idea of what these sets looked like, or what it looked like on camera, it's like there'd be 2 or 3 people in a room blanketed with just full-grown lions. Mm-hmm. Either asleep or pacing or whatever. This is not a situation where it's oh, we have a single trained animal on set. It's no, these are rooms full of wild lions.
Right, and they were just trying to film. The whole thing was that it was supposed to be a love letter to the family, and they were just trying to show the world how they live, through film. Because it's Melanie Griffith as a child could literally walk through the kitchen to get some Captain Crunch, and there's a fucking huge 800-pound tiger on the tile floor, because they were just part of the family. And
they're great.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Frosted Flakes.
Frosted Flakes.
I had to. Sorry, cereal joke.
No, that's fantastic. You know what, that I should have thought of that one. But yeah, like we said, there's really not a lot of plot. It just, I think it's really of you guys to really do your research when it comes to this movie, because it is intense. Just the massive amounts of injuries that were just constant, and like all the money that they hemorrhaged through this production, because like the set was like flooding, and then they had to put more money into it, and it was just like it was such a time consuming, deadly, money wasting.
Well, also watching it, it's got like this palpable sense of tension, because you can feel everybody in the production, whether on screen or off screen, everybody is fucking terrified. Like it's like everybody's like walking on eggshells, like don't freak the nines out. Like,
yeah.
It's just crazy. It's insane.
What's next on your list of animal attack movies, Holly?
Well, this is my number one, which might say something about me that's a little bit. It's like, really? That's like your favorite animal attack movie? It's like, no, it really is. Because it combines two of my favorite things on the planet. Actually, three of my favorite things on the planet. New Zealand, mm-hmm. horror movies,
mm-hmm. and sheep.
The film is Black Sheep.
Mm-hmm.
Not to be confused with the Chris Farley movie of the same name from 1996. This is a New Zealand production about a farm, an oldfield farm. Mm-hmm. Essentially, the premise is there are two brothers who are going to inherit this sheep farm. Mm-hmm. The older brother terrifies the younger brother with a sheep gag when he's a kid. Mm-hmm. Like basically puts a dead sheep head on himself and like goes and like freaks the hell out of him. So the younger son has a sheep phobia. Mm-hmm. Like he can't even be around sheep. But their fathers died, and so he's come back to the farm to collect his portion of the farm in cash. Mm-hmm. It just so happens that in his absence, Henry Oldfield, who's the younger son, his older brother Angus, has been doing some not so couth genetic experiments with the sheep, leading to various toxic, biohazard substances. Mm-hmm. And there happened to be two basically activist hippies in the area, mm-hmm. spying on the experimental facility. They steal one of these biohazards, mm-hmm. which is basically like an aborted sheep fetus in like a jar or something. Like it's totally ridiculous. And they break the jar, and the aborted sheep fetus bites one of them, setting off this chain reaction of rabid, insane, mutated biohazard sheep.
Like Night of the Living Dead with sheep.
Yes. This movie is fucking amazing. Can I just say, oh my God. Like, it knows it's ridiculous, and it plays off of that. Mm-hmm. And obviously, the two hippies, like the one hippie, Grant, the one who gets bitten by the fetus sheep, he turns into like a mutant sheep and like starts like eating, grass and animals and stuff. The other one, her name is Experience. Mm-hmm. And she ends up running into Henry Oldfield, the younger son, and the farmhand Tucker, and Henry's grandmother, who is in her little cabin making haggis, while these sheep are biting each other and mutating and becoming terrifying. one of the crowning jewels of this film, again, fancy party being invaded by killer animals. The effects in this are just fantastic. A friend of mine, Dave LZ, who actually went on to win an Oscar with Rick Baker for The Wolfman,
Mm-hmm.
worked on the sheet for this movie in 2005, which involved, where sheep, the bizarre fetus sheep, like basically taking sheep and like knocking people over, and like the pretense that the sheep were attacking these people, like just going whoosh, and the people were like, ah, like it's ingenious. Like I can't say enough about how much I love this movie. I love this movie.
Mm-hmm. So there's a couple other movies on the list. One I would consider, aside from, Jaws, being the father, obviously, of the, not even just the summer blockbuster, but of course, just animal attack movies in general. Jaws will always be like the grandest one of all. I would say this is kind of like the father of animal attack movies, I guess. When it comes to, just its importance and, just bringing just really intense levity, to the situation when it comes to that type of idea. And, I mean, we like if you go way, way back, we had a whole episode where we honored my Lord and Savior, Stephen King. But I think the reason, or one of the main reasons, aside from just the film itself, that I love so much about this, just this idea, is he is obviously a very clean and happy individual now, but around the time he wrote this book, he wrote it in a cocaine stupor and woke up with the manuscript on the table after a weekend with
God bless him.
And
yeah,
that was apparently the same situation with Christine as well. He doesn't even remember writing this shit. As somebody who actually was an author for quite some time, I wish I had that ability to be able to fucking just write something amazing and not remember.
Come out of your stupor and be like, what?
Yeah, and
I wrote a masterpiece.
Yeah, so we're talking about Cujo, and I think the reason why I love this movie so much, from the actual animal aspect, is that there was no really rhyme or reason for this dog to be as deadly as it was, except for the fact that it was just being a playful Saint Bernard, and it got bit in the face by a bat that was rabid. You know what I mean? There was no supernatural, situations. There was no, you know what I mean? It was just, just a regular loving dog that just happened to be in a position where, it just got hurt. And I mean, the whole time that you're watching Cujo, like you're supposed to be looking at this dog as the villain or whatever, but I just feel for this dog the entire time. It's awful.
That's part of why it's part of why I have such a hard time watching it, because as a lover of dogs, it's really hard to see a dog that doesn't that is not in control of its own actions.
He's not cognitive at all. No, he's just rabid. He's a rabid dog at that point, and doesn't, and initially would probably be loving up on Dee Wallace and her son. You know what I mean? Like, it's the most loving. Saint Bernards are beautiful dogs.
Oh, I love Saint Bernards. They're so sweet.
Yeah. But I do love the human drama. As I said, I'm a huge fan of human drama, and there's a ton of human drama when it comes to, this whole situation within the family dynamic, which is, Dee Wallace is having an affair on her husband, plain and simple, and her son Danny Pintaro, played by Danny Pintaro, is, he's got his own fears that he's trying to overcome, and there's just a lot of tension within this family. And interestingly enough, the guy that was playing the man that she was having an affair with was actually Dee Wallace's real husband, who passed away. So she basically, goes to a farm to, to get her car fixed, pretty much. Yeah. And that's you know, that's the only catalyst to, you know, to bring her into this really horrifying situation. She was just, you know, like she's trying to fix her car.
Yeah.
And,
Well, and
and
it also what also I really like about it is that there are all these, quote unquote coincidences or just sort of happenstance circumstances that lead to that particular
yeah,
thing happening. Like her husband just happens to be out of town at the time. She just happens to pull up to and the guy who's gonna fix her car has been killed by the dog, and
yep.
like there's just a bunch of stuff that like it could have gone any other way, but
Yeah,
it does not.
it's all circumstantial but somewhat inevitable. And if we're talking about Stephen King, Ka is in fact a wheel, so maybe it was, you know, always her supreme intent to, you know, to go there. If you want to get into the fantastical logistics of Stephen King, um, obviously it's pretty straightforward. It's like, you know, they're trying to get out of this deadly situation, and you know, her son has extreme asthma, and he's having an asthma attack the entire time that they're in the car. So they're just contending with all this really, really horrible shit. And in the meanwhile, you have the Saint Bernard, this massive dog, trying to get into the car. And you know what? I will say when it comes to you know, to the terror aspect, like even now, it's still very effective. It's terrifying. It really is. Um, and the other thing about it is that, you know, like, you know, D Wallace is acting her ass off in this movie, and
Yeah.
and Danny Bottaro was acting his ass off in this movie. D Wallace should have been nominated for an Academy Award. I've said this to D quite a few times in passing. Um, I think she got screwed by the Academy. I think it was around the time where the Academy wasn't really, you know, paying attention to quote unquote horror films. I guess, you know, maybe like Carrie and Exorcist slipped through the cracks.
Yeah.
But you know, as we all know, the Academy, you know, has, you know, for many years snubbed horror for, you know, a good amount, and they don't have a horror category even now, which is ridiculous. But I digress. Um, yeah, it's just a really beautifully done movie, from, you know, from the actual, like, you know, from the humanistic aspects of it to, you know, the actual terror involved with the dog, because that was, you know, that would be the last thing on your, you know, like you would think is scary, is a Saint Bernard, but he's horrifying when he's hurt. But you know, the whole time it's like, you know, I guess, you know, because you're you know, you know, like a lover of dogs or lover of animals, you know, like you just really feel for this. I feel for the dog. I really do. I really do. It's horrible, you know. And you know, even when she, you know, is just trying to, you know, like survive with her son, you know, when she, you know, shoots him at the end of the movie, it almost feels like, you know what, you know, even that, you know, kind of feels inevitable, you know, because that dog was just so sick and ridden with rabies at that point. You'd have to put him down. You'd have to.
Yeah.
The last movie that me and Holly both want to talk about is probably, as far as mainstream cinema is concerned, you know, when it comes to theatrical, you know, releases, I think this one, when it comes to animal attack films, like definitely reinvigorated this subgenre. When you're
Yeah.
not talking about, like, you know, sci-fi movies, you know, like, you know, that are actually, like, I mean sci-fi movies like on the Sci-Fi Channel and stuff. I'm talking about, like, you know, people's interest in animal
Yeah,
attack.
we did it like stuff like Sharktopus and Dino Shark doesn't count.
Yeah.
That's all science fiction stuff.
Yeah,
So
and incidentally, it's actually one of, it was actually reported recently that it's one of Quentin Tarantino's greatest one of his favorite horror films of all time, which, I mean, is a huge credit to this movie because it just came out last
yeah.
year,
Hmm.
you know. Um, so we're going to be talking about Crawl, which was produced by Sam Raimi and directed by Alexandra Aja. Um, I think when it initially, like, you know, when the announcement came out that, you know, Sam Raimi was going to be producing an alligator film, I don't think anybody thought anything of it. They were just kind of like, so, you know, like,
Yeah.
all right. um, so the Rasputin brothers, who you know, wrote the script, they wrote a really, really solid script, obviously. And it was so, you know, effective on the screen. And you know, Alexandre is just like one of the best horror directors there is, no question about it. From, you know, from High Tension to, um, you know, P2 to, the guy's fantastic. Um, but yeah, so basically, it's just like another one of those situations, you know, where, you know, like a family is actually trapped in their home. So if you guys haven't seen it, it's the main character is Haley, and she was, you know, trained by her father, played by Barry Pepper. She's like almost an Olympic swimmer, pretty much.
Yeah.
But she's estranged from her dad, and she finds out that there's a hurricane coming to the area. She goes to his condo. He actually isn't there, and then ends up going back to her old childhood home, and, you know, finds that the door is open, and you know, she goes in like searching for her dad, and then it turns out he's actually stuck in the crawl space of this house.
Yeah. He's injured himself, and he's stuck under. I guess it's not really the basement. It's like
it's like the crawl space in the basement he's stuck in.
Yeah.
With a hurricane outside of the house. There's actually like an open like storm drain. That was the only thing that really unnerved me about this movie, or really kind of aggravated me, was that there was like these design structures like carved into the brick. So if you live in a hurricane area, why the hell would you have an opening where water just pours into your house?
plot holes.
Well, I don't think it's just a plot hole. I think it was just kind of like just a design idea, you know, when it comes to production. But it's just like, you know, when you're looking at it, you're just like, oh my God, like that is such a horrible, it's a horrible choice.
Yeah.
So she finds her dad, you know, in this crawl space of this basement. Maybe why it's called Crawl. People think it's the alligators that are crawling, but it's actually the crawl space. So she finds her dad, and you know, basically, you know, they're just trying to get out of this house. So I think she dropped her cell phone or something. So she actually tries to go around the corner, you know, like as this thing's not looking. These huge fucking alligators. And the one thing that I recall saying in our Best of 2019 episode, because Crawl was on my favorites of 2019 list.
Yeah, I remember.
There was something deathly wrong with these alligators, almost like they were possessed by something. You know what I mean? Like they weren't just alligators. It was literally like Michael Myers with a tail. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, I think they sort of addressed that later on in the film when they find like the nest, you know. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of like if that's how these alligators got into the crawl space, then they would feel sort of uber protective. But yeah, for most of the film, it's a little bit unclear. They're just sort of.
I'm just talking about, like, you know, when you see them in the water and stuff, like their eyes are just milky white. There's something wrong with these alligators. There's something deathly seriously wrong with them. And, you know, they're just attacking people left and right. Like, you know, even outside, you know, when there's a great scene where.
That's one of my favorite parts. The gas station.
Yeah, the gas station.
Love it. So good.
Yeah. And, you know, like for anybody who hasn't seen Crawl and, you know, doesn't think, you know, they didn't hold back on the gore. This movie is brutal. It is brutal.
Yeah, and for people like me who enjoy a high body count, I was very pleased with that.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But I also like it. I also like its uniqueness in that it starts with no water in the crawl space, mm-hmm. where the alligators are basically just as deadly. Mm-hmm. And then when the water starts to fill up, then it becomes like more and more like sort of hopeless.
Yeah.
You know, like it gets worse and worse and worse. And that's part of what escalates the film's tension, I think, is realizing that the more water that comes in, the more screwed you are.
Yeah, but not for her, because she's a fantastic swimmer. So she actually, you know, like uses that to her advantage. But the thing about her and her father is, you know, when it comes to like them as a family dynamic, Jesus Christ, they're like one of the toughest families I've ever seen. I mean, literally both of them just get wrecked this entire movie. I mean, you know, like legs shorn and, you know, oh God, she gets brutalized every second, you know, and still, you know, like has this resilience to be able to, you know, just has a survival instinct. And, yeah, there's some really, you know, just incredible set pieces within, you know, like the water, you know, obviously, like, you know, there's a scene, you know, where she's in the kitchen and she's trying to climb across, you know, like the countertops and stuff. And, you know, like, there's moments in the living room and, so all the different spots in the house are actually used. And then there's a scene, there's a
Oh, I was going to say, I love the moments where she's trying to get out of the crawl space basement, and there's a chair sitting on top of the trap door, and it just, you know, that's a big like sort of yikesy sort of idea.
Oh yeah, for sure. Oh yeah, and Barry Pepper's leg is like literally half hanging off. And this guy's such a badass that he actually takes like a tool belt and like makes a tourniquet out of a tool belt, so his leg doesn't bleed to death. I mean, this thing is literally like an open gaping wound. Oh my god, this movie's crazy. And then the family actually does get out, finds a boat, and because of the hurricane, they end up getting thrown back into the house.
Yep.
This poor and then what happens? Barry Pepper gets his arm bit off. This movie's awesome. But the thing that I think the reason why it was so effective is it wasn't just about the alligators, and the family was just as interesting and entertaining as well. And you could tell that those two, if I'm not mistaken, I think the actress said that it was one of the most grueling things she's ever done. Like, she'd lost like tons of weight, and gained a ton of muscle, which she was actually really happy about. But she also she just got hurt every single day. They were working maybe like 14, 16-hour days every single day. And I mean, it was literally like a grueling process to get this movie made. But yeah, it was just a really well done film. And I think the most important thing about Crawl is that even if you weren't a fan of the animal attack film, I think a lot of people kind of fell in love with the idea of animal attack films because as I said before, and I think Holly would agree, that this one it definitely reinvigorated the genre for sure, or the subgenre.
Well, and also it introduced, at least to me, which really made me happy, is that it introduced sort of the post kill the dog era, because there's a dog
lives the entire
there's a dog in the entire film, and in any movie that was made in like the 70s or 80s or maybe even the 90s,
the dog be gone in 5 minutes.
The dog's toast, just bam. And I feel like this movie acknowledges that and is like, you know what? No.
Yeah, you know what?
They keep the dog alive till the very end. And it lives just like the rest of the family. And that, I admire that self-awareness, that it can be like, okay, in every other horror movie ever, the dog would be dead. But we're not going to do that because that's expected.
Yeah.
It's like a cheap shot, and I'm glad they didn't take that cheap shot.
Yeah, and also to Crawl's credit, I mean, this thing was a massive sleeper hit. It made tons and tons of money at the box office, critically acclaimed for the most part across the board. I mean, just a bona fide hit. Which you don't necessarily really expect from animal attack films. I don't think a lot of them get a lot of accolades,
aside from like really big shark movies.
Yeah. But this is I think this is I would even go as far as saying that when it comes to this particular area of horror, like this is definitely important, and this is something that we're going to be talking about for a long time. Certainly gave her a career. She's going to be in the Resident Evil Netflix show. So
fucking A.
Yeah, man. Yeah, for sure. I really loved Crawl. One of the best of 2019, hands down, for sure.
I liked it a lot too.
So that's our episode, Animal Attack Movies. This is Cherry Darling.
This is Bucky Interlandi.
All right.
Bucky the Winter Soldier Interlandi.
These are our attack animals.
Very fierce. Very fierce.
If you like the show, please like and subscribe on the Horror Web YouTube channel. Be sure to let us know which Animal Attack movies are your favorites in the comments. Be sure to tune in for the Dungeon of Deadly Delights podcast. And we will scare you later. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Oh, Say bye, Cookie. Say bye. Oh yes, yes, yes.